really, I think one of my initial ideas going forward was that I just really wanted to show people what you could do with the main system itself. And my hope was that people would, start reading some of these and they would reach a point where they say, well, I could just do my own. I don't need to look at all of these. I don't need to download all of these. Look, I've looked at like half a dozen and I can see that, there's a formula here. You just have your concept and your perks and your quirks. I can do that for my setting. I don't need to use yours anymore. And that's what I want. I want people to look at these and treat them as examples of how they can easily adapt their own settings to Tricube Tales.
Hi, welcome to Dieku Games, and I'm Gary Snow, and I'm here with Richard Woolcock, otherwise known as Zadmar. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you here. I've noticed your game products floating around for quite a while now, and I've always been curious to see how your games actually came to be, because they're quite unique in the space, and so. I'd really like to hear the full story of how you got there, including how you got started in role-playing games.
Well, I think when I was about 8 years old, a friend of mine at school brought a copy of Redbox D&D in, and he encouraged me to play some of his games. And I think neither of us really knew what we were doing. I guess he probably got the game from an older sibling, and we struggled through a few sessions, just in school breaks, and that didn't really work out so well. But I kind of liked the whole fantasy thing. I was very much into the fighting fantasy books. And then a few years later, I received a copy of Dragon Warriors. I think it was an accidental gift from my parents, who thought it was a fighting fantasy book, and it was the same format, the same style of artwork. And yeah, I mean, I read this book and I was thinking, first of all, I thought, what's this? This isn't fighting fantasy. This isn't a choose your own adventure book. But when I sort of started reading through it, and everything really clicked, and I got in touch with some of my friends and I said, hey, look what I found. And we started playing that. First of all, I GM'd, and then my other friends wanted to GM as well. And it kind of rolled on from there, where we started looking into other systems. We started trying out Rollmaster and Palladium, and we were also getting into the Warhammer Fantasy battles. So we also, from there, we sort of combined them and played the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. And we really tried a whole load of different systems. And we also started experimenting with creating our own games as well, which was really sort of combining elements of different games that we played. And
what,
I guess that kind of...
Where were you living at the time? Like, where did you grow up?
Mm-hmm. Oh, right, sorry. Well, I was originally born on the Isle of Wight in the UK, and I moved to Portsmouth when I was about 5 or 6. And yeah, that's where I sort of went to school and met my friends. And I went to university there as well. And then so with the group that we played together locally, and when we went to university, we went to different universities around the country, but I stayed in the area. And I joined the role-playing society at the university, and fell in with a new crowd, and very much Vampire the Masquerade was kind of like the flavor of the month there. So I played a lot of Vampire the Masquerade and some of the other World of Darkness games. And we tried out a lot of other systems there as well. People from different backgrounds, they had past experiences with all sorts of different systems. And after I graduated from university, I moved to Cheltenham, which is in the sort of middle of England, sort of Midwest. And I sort of stopped role playing for quite a while then. I would occasionally keep touch with my friends, but it was too far to travel just for role playing. And there was no online gaming back then. So
that seems to be a bit of a common thing. It's happened to me as well. You start having responsibilities as an adult and jobs and that kind of stuff. And what were you professionally trained to do at university?
Well, I'm a software engineer by profession. So that's what I studied at university. And that's what I've been working in for the last 25 years.
What?
So yeah, I was very much into the programming side of things as well. So if you've seen some of my tools on my website, Those are sort of the things which I programmed. And yeah, when I was in Cheltenham, I think I've been living there for a couple of years, and I finally thought, right, I need to get a group together. So I got a group of people together and we started gaming. And a few months after that, I ended up moving to a different part of the country. I moved to Fleet, which is in Hampshire in the south. And I worked there for another 2.5 years. And once again, no gaming for 2 years. Finally formed a group. A few months later, I moved again. And at this point, I was doing the GMing. So I'm using the systems that I was familiar with, which was mostly World of Darkness from university. But then in 2001, I moved to Munich, Germany for another job. And I'd been in Germany for about 6 months, and I said, right, I'm not gonna wait 2 years again and join a group and then move again. I really need to be proactive about this. And I finally managed to find a group that were willing to play in English, because I didn't speak any German when I moved to Germany. So I found a group, and yeah, first of all, they were GMing and they were running various different systems. And then over the years, as people left, I gradually started moving into more of a GMing role with that group as well. And I ran a lot of different systems there, some homebrew stuff, but mostly World of Darkness. And then when D&D 3.5 came out, I saw that and I saw Eberron, and I thought, you know, that Eberron sounded very good, and I fancied something a bit different. So I picked up that and I ran D&D 3.5 my group, and I started alternating between D&D and World of Darkness. And I very much liked aspects of both, but it was always the case that after running one of them for a while, you know, I started getting a bit bored of it. You know, if I ran the World of Darkness game for a while, and that was good from the storytelling perspective, and then the campaign would culminate in a big epic battle, which really was just grabbing huge fistful of dice and throwing them. And I felt very anticlimactic. And I thought, you know, I'd like to play something that's a bit more tactical. So then I switched to D&D. And I'd run D&D for a while, but you know, certainly with D&D 3.5, as you got to the higher levels, the game started slowing down and slowing down. And I remember that we ran one combat encounter, and it took the entire session, several hours, and we still hadn't finished. And that really soured me on that. And then I started switching back, and it kept being the case that I'd run one campaign until it kind of ran out of steam, and then I'd switch. Then I discovered Savage Worlds. And Savage Worlds combined what I like best about both of the systems, both World of Darkness and D&D. So it had edges and hindrances, which were a bit like the merits and flaws in World of Darkness, and a bit like the feats in D&D. And the combat was tactical with minis, just like D&D 3.5 was, but it was much faster, particularly if there were lots of combatants, you know, fighting on the battle mat. But in addition to that, you didn't really have the sort of the zero to hero concept that you had from D&D. You had more like which I preferred, the World of Darkness approach, where you could create a character who right from the beginning was really competent in their chosen field. You know, you could create a private investigator who was already much better than most people. And yeah, so I very much liked Savage Worlds from that perspective. And I ran Savage Worlds for quite a while. I even used it to carry on the Eberron campaign I'd been running previously. And I started experimenting with a lot of other settings after that, because I think one of the strengths of Savage Worlds is that there are so many settings for it. So
yeah, and I mean, it seems that Savage Worlds really scratches that kind of,
and that's really kind of the direction I went.
It seems like it kind of scratches that middle ground for a lot of people, where it's like not crunchy, and it's not story games. It's kind of like that nice happy medium. And so I don't know if that's kind of like that happy zone that you found.
Yeah, very much. It's very much medium crunch, I think.
And then when did you make that flip to going, hey, I'm going to design or create in the Savage World settings? As far as like, I mean, it seems like you've always been kind of playing with that kind of notion of designing your own thing. Is what was that final moment where you went, I'm doing this?
Yeah, I mean, and I've always been creating my own stuff right from the beginning. And I was creating my own systems almost as soon as I started role playing, and I was always adapting rule systems that I played. But when I joined the Savage Worlds community, the first thing I did was sign up to their forums. And I saw that there was quite a large fan community that created and published a lot of their own PDFs. And all of the stuff I'd done previously was private. It was just shared with my group or just for myself. I even had one game system I wrote, which I didn't actually write it. It was all in my head. And I ran several games of that, but I never even wrote anything down. But when I saw all these PDFs that people were producing, and these looked, just fairly professional, and I thought, wow, that looks really cool. I'd really love to do something like that. So I started playing around with Word, and I used some free artwork, and I exported to PDF, and I created a few toolkits. I think my first one was a sort of a supernatural, well, it was called Supernaturalis, and it was a sort of a superpower type. Well, I called it a cap setting because it was designed to fit on top of an existing setting. It wasn't a setting that's superpowered characters in an existing campaign. You could use this, and yeah, I got some fairly good feedback. But people were mostly interested in the weapon creation system that I'd written for it. It had just one of the chapters was weapon creation, so I turned that into another little toolkit, and that was much better received. So I started playing around with creating toolkits as well.
And what time frame is this that you were making these toolkits?
I started in 2012. In fact, the first thing I did was I was reading some discussions about like the relative value of different fighting edges and abilities, and I wrote a little combat simulator, and I started running numbers just to get a better idea of how the system worked. And as I expanded that, I found that I was able to assign pretty good values to different abilities and actually use them to build a weapon creation system that was fairly balanced. Because one of the problems I had when I ran the rules as written was that people would look at the weapons and they say, well, the katana is clearly the best weapon in the game. So people would take the katana, of course. And if somebody wanted something else, they were kind of being punished for choosing a weapon that was cool rather than effective. So I wanted with this weapon creation system to have something that allowed people to design any weapon they liked, but it would be equally as effective as any other weapon. So in that case, sort of your weapon choice was a tactical choice, but it wasn't in choosing a better or a worse weapon, just a different weapon. And yeah, and then I started applying the same concept to other things as well. And I created various different toolkits. I did that for about 3 years, I think, just churning out lots of different toolkits and lots of different little PDFs. And yeah, that's how I started establishing myself in the Savage Worlds community.
And what was the what was the kind of the first big project? Like it seems when I see the Saga of the Goblin Horde, is that your big kind of breakthrough?
That was my biggest, I think. I mean, I was already fairly well known by that point in the Savage Worlds community. I'd created a bunch of stuff, and I actually had several of the official licensees contact me, wanting me to freelance for them. It was when I really started upping my game, and I learned how to use Scribus, and I started purchasing proper artwork. Not just the free stuff, which is low resolution, but high quality artwork. And that's when I created Saga of the Goblin Horde. And yeah, I think that's probably what I'm best known for in the Savage Worlds community now. That is the player's guide, which is so one of the things is with the Savage World settings, certainly the older ones, they used to have the full setting book, and then they'd have what was called the player's guide, which was the first half of the main book just chopped out. So it was a smaller PDF, and it just meant that you could give it to your players and it had no spoilers in it. So that's what I did there. So this is effectively the first half of the main setting book. So it doesn't have the adventures in it, or any of the monsters, or any of the secrets in it.
Why did you choose goblins? What was the inspiration for that?
The original idea was actually based on a book, a story I read in Dragon magazine a long time ago, and it was Tucker's Kobolds, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
No, I'm not.
No, okay. So the way I remember it was that it was a story about a GM called Tucker who had this dungeon that was really terrifying, and this was like old school, really dangerous, high fatality rate type thing. And in the first level of his dungeon were the kobolds. And although there were many levels to this dungeon with all sorts of horrific creatures in them, and supposedly getting more dangerous the lower level you got, it was the kobolds that people were the most afraid of, because they were like commandos, and they used all sorts of horrific tactics, like the worst possible tactics you can think of. You know, some insane person coming up with all sorts of things like starting fires and forcing the players down death traps and blocking off routes and smoking them out and bombing them and sniping them. And they had this whole level was a warren of little tunnels, and these kobolds were absolute killers. And I really, really love this story. The idea behind this was to show, I guess, what a vicious GM could do, or a vicious DM in this case could do. But from what I took from that was that, you know, it seemed to be a great idea for playing as kobolds, because wouldn't it be fun to actually play the kobolds slaughtering the adventurers? So this was something that I'd had in mind for a long time, that I really fancied creating a game where the players were the weak kobolds who actually slaughtered the adventurers. But then I was looking for an idea for a Savage Worlds setting. I wanted to create something a bit different to the things that were already out there. And I saw that there was a whole load of really good Goblin stock art from Rick Hershey of Fat Goblin Games. So I picked up this Goblin art pack, and I'd also been doing some freelance work on Drakkenheim, City of Bones, which also had a Goblin race in there. And it kind of all these ideas kind of came together, and I thought, you know, I could use this artwork, and I could, you know, have goblins rather than kobolds, because these goblins had all sorts of weird mutations, which meant there would be quite a bit of variety, even though the players were just goblins. And, you know, I sort of put all these ideas together, and I just created a setting where the players were the goblins. And there were various other games out there where the players are goblins, you know, like Weeby Goblins and Goblin Quest and so on. But very often the goblins are portrayed as being like really weak and pathetic. And even in the Pathfinder, where they are quite dangerous, they're more of a joke than anything. And I didn't want that. I wanted the goblins to really be dangerous. So I sort of split it up where you had the borderland goblins, who are your typical weak goblins that most adventurers discovered. And then I had, okay, but in addition, you've got the tribal goblins, which is what the players are, that are a lot more dangerous. And, you know, the adventurers were killing off borderland goblins. Okay, fair enough. But when they start coming into the tribal goblins territory, then the tribal goblins do not like that. So this was what I started kind of turning into a setting, the idea that these goblins had decided to give those adventurers a bloody nose and teach them that they weren't to be messed with. And yeah, there's a lot of sort of humor in there as well. It originally started off quite a dark setting, but whenever I ran it for various groups, they always kind of played it like Weeby Goblins, like slapstick. So I thought, well, if that's what people want to play, then I'll make it a bit more over the top. And as the adventures progressed, I just started getting more and more over the top with them, just trying to find even more insane things for the goblins to do.
And then I noted on your website or on your drive-through RPG that you have a whole bunch of holiday-themed adventures. And is that for the Goblin Horde game?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few there. I created quite a few of these one-sheet adventures. So Savage Worlds is known for its one-sheet adventures, which is an adventure that fits on both sides of a single sheet of paper. And I really like that format. And to try and promote the setting, I started releasing regular one-sheet adventures for it. And around Christmas time, I would usually create a Christmas-themed one. And I think I created 4 of them, actually. There's 4 of them.
And, so you know, they look fun, right? Like they're out there to either save or sabotage the holidays.
That's right. Well, actually, the Sanguine Solstice was the first, and that actually predated the setting. And that was when I was still playing around with the idea of, you know, the players being these goblins that were going around doing crazy stuff, attacking the humans, and it just started out as a one-sheet adventure. And I thought, you know, I really should create some pre-gens to go with it, because you can't use the existing characters, and Savage Wars didn't even have a goblin race. So I thought, well, you know, I'll put together some archetypes for it. So in Savage Worlds, they use the term archetype for pre-generated characters quite often. So after a while, I created a set of 4 archetypes, and then I started releasing a new one every month and just expanding the PDF. And I started releasing additional adventures for it as well, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
And you also produced as Savage World uses a card deck, you've produced some card decks and other materials that you could use with your game, and you just continued to build up that whole Savage Worlds setting. And that was that prior to the ACES program, publishing program?
Well, the ACE program is for the current edition, the Adventures edition. Before that, they were called official licensees, and but there is now the SWAG program, which is like a community content program, a bit like the DM's Guild, and that's what I've used. I've used that to sell a few things on drive-through with SWAG, but I wasn't an official licensee, so I used the fan license. Previously, you had either the official license or the fan license, but now you've got the ACE, the fan, and the SWAG.
So seeing where Savage Worlds has come from those initial beginnings, and I'm not actually sure exactly when Savage Worlds sort of started, but I mean, it's been obviously since like probably 2010, 11-ish, maybe even sooner.
Earlier, yeah.
And what changes have you seen as far as the products and the kind of their rule sets that over the years that you've seen grow with the players?
Well, the very early stuff that I saw was actually quite crude in terms of trade dress. A bit, not to sound negative, but almost a bit amateurish. Some of the very early PDFs, but the quality has massively increased over the years. I started in 2010, and I started with the Savage Worlds Explorers edition, which had been published, I think, in 2009. And that would have been about the 3rd edition, because you had the first Savage Worlds, then you had Savage Worlds Revised, and then I think it was the Savage Worlds Explorers edition, and then Savage Worlds Deluxe came out in 2011 or 12, and I had been playing for a little while by that point, maybe a year or so, and I switched over to Deluxe, and that was much better than the Explorers edition. And in terms of trade dress, in terms of rules, they added a lot more. They tightened up a lot of things, and I stuck with Deluxe for a long time. And Saga of the Goblin Horde is also written for Deluxe. And then the Adventurous edition came out more recently, or I guess not so recently. It's a few years old now as well. And that was a massive increase in terms of trade dress. You know, the new Savage Worlds stuff looks amazing. Some of it really does looks good. And the rules, well, I mean, they always change things up, and there are some things that I did prefer from the previous edition, some things I prefer from the new edition, but you know, overall it's definitely an improvement in quality and improvement in terms of rules. And also it's quite interesting to see that there's more of a shift towards sort of narrative style elements, introducing the idea of influencing the story with your bennies and changes like that. Like the interludes came in Deluxe. That was allowing you to tell a short story about your character and earn a benny. So Savage Worlds seems to be pushing more towards, I guess, adding more narrative elements, but at the same time, it does also have a lot of crunchy stuff. So, as we talked about previously, it's very much in the medium crunch, and I think it has a lot from both sides of the divide.
And the user base, the fan base of Savage Worlds, have you also noticed that increase over time?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit difficult. The Pinnacle forums used to be very, very active, and then they went down for several months. And when they came back, a lot of people just didn't come back with them. People had gone off to other communities, and then, yeah, I think it never really quite got back to the same way it was. So there is a large community, but it's kind of split among different sites. And then when Google Plus disappeared, that was one of the larger Savage Worlds communities that once again disappeared. And then the old Savage World forum archives disappeared, which a lot of people used to reference. So I think there is definitely a larger community, but it's more sort of split around the net now. You've got groups on Facebook, you've got Discord, You've got the forums still, and it is a good community. But I think I missed that in a way when it started out. It was everyone was on the official forums, and it felt more close knit. You know, the developers like Clint Black was very hands on and always explaining things to people, always willing to give advice, and that kind of fostered a sort of a almost like a family type atmosphere where you felt you were. It was always very friendly. You didn't really have people getting very aggressive with each other. So, but it is a good community, but it has changed over the years. I think it's just grown.
And so you like Savage Worlds, you're making Savage World settings, and then for some reason you say, forget it, I'm going to go my own way and make Tricube. And how did that happen?
Well, it was, I do still do Savage World stuff. I'm still involved in the community. But when I was looking for, systems that I could publish, and I was using the fan license, which was non-commercial, and, I spent probably about $600 or $700 on artwork for Saga of the Goblin Horde, which was quite a lot of money. Well, I mean, actually, it's a very small amount compared to how much a book would normally cost. But still, that's not really a sustainable model, putting lots of money into something and giving it away for free. So I started looking around for systems I could use for commercial use. And I did look into a number of other systems, but I couldn't really find anything that was quite right. I'm a bit picky when it comes to different systems. I've played many, many systems, and I always kind of see, I can see the good in everything, but I can also see the bad in it. And or perhaps bad is the wrong word, but I can see that things aren't quite, they're not what I want, and I want to change things. I want to tinker with things. And I thought, well, I could pick up an established system, but if I'm immediately going to start hacking up the rule set, then I'll alienate the fan base. So, what's the point? This isn't something I do for a living. It's something I do as a hobby. So the important thing is it's something that I enjoy. If I was just focused on the money, then I would say, okay, D&D. So, to be fair, if I was focused on the money, I wouldn't be doing role-playing products at all. But D&D or the
advice there.
The OSR stuff is obviously very popular, has a very big following. Something like that would be good, but I don't really enjoy it that much anymore. I've seen some really good OSR stuff like the Black Hack, fantastic stuff. White Hack has some great ideas, which I've also borrowed. Some of the stuff by like Stars Without Number, it's got some amazing stuff in there. Loads of toolkit stuff that I can borrow, but I don't really enjoy playing the D&D style games anymore. And I did run recently Shadow the Demon Lord, a campaign, which is I consider that to be a sort of an OSR style game. It has a lot of D&D feel to it, and it's a very cool system. It's got some really elegant mechanics, but it's not something I felt I could run long term. I have different sort of tastes. I think having played Savage Worlds for so long, I tend to also like to have a lot of narrative elements in it. There's certain mechanics that I like to have, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do something that I enjoy, then I might as well create my own system, because I actually kind of enjoy the mechanics more than the fluff side of things. I wrote the setting and I wrote a lot of adventures, but those aren't really my sort of forte. I do them, but I actually kind of prefer working on mechanics. So I started working on a system called Swift D12, which was a D12 based system. And that was designed to be fairly compatible with Savage Worlds, because I've been thinking of porting over a lot of my content that I'd already written. But then I had a lot of other ideas as well, which didn't really fit with it. And if you've got ideas, you have to kind of sacrifice them for the greater good. But part of me sort of felt, well, these are really good ideas. I could use them for something. And I started putting them together. And I experimented with a few other smaller games. I created a couple of entries for the 200 word RPG challenge. And I created a small game called Blood and Bile, which is about playing vampires during a zombie apocalypse. And I created a few other bits and pieces as well. But then I started playing around with this Tricube Tales. I think originally it was using sort of leftover ideas from Swift D12, and it had a working title of Small Worlds, because I thought this could be like a super lightweight version or super lightweight game that had a similar feel to Savage Worlds. And it didn't use any of the mechanics from Savage Worlds, but I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could have a little system that you could play all of those one-sheet adventures, because there's hundreds of them, you know. And I had to play around with that, but it just didn't feel right. You know, when you're working on something, you're working on a game idea, and you can feel that it just doesn't fit right. It doesn't seem to match up with what you're trying to do. And I started looking at some other systems, and my earlier Blood and Bile system, which used D6s. And then I looked at the Tiny Dungeons, which uses 1 to 3d6. And I thought, you know, I could do something more like that, use just a d6 based mechanic for it. So I scrapped scrapped the whole dice resolution system because it was just too complicated, and I used d6s instead. And I kind of streamlined the whole thing down, really, really simple. And it was just really like a set of guidelines. And this is about the time I was getting my son into role playing. And he was about 5 then. And so I thought, right, you know, I can run some games for him as well. And it's so simple. It's just rolling a few dice, 1, 2, or 3 dice. And I didn't have the perks and quirks. It was really just a case that he had a character concept which is based on whatever he was watching on TV. Like if he was watching Paw Patrol, then he'd want to play Chase. And if he was watching Ghostbusters, the cartoon, he'd be playing one of the Ghostbusters, or maybe he'd be Lloyd from Ninjago. And because I was watching these with him, I had a feel for what the characters were capable of. So I would just say to him, yeah, okay, just roll 1, 2, or 3 dice, and he would just roll them, and we would just go from there. And if I could see that he'd missed the target number by 1, then I would say, you know, you can spend a karma if you want to turn that into a success. And so then I started building it back up again into an actual system. And the first version of Tricube Tales I released was actually what I called a one-sheet system. So much like I had the one-sheet adventures for Saga the Goblin Horde, I had this actual entire role-playing system that fit on 1 sheet of paper. And yeah, I typed it all up, and I did nice layouts, and I released it. And I think I got one comment from somebody that it needed more examples. And then it was just downloaded to oblivion. And I thought, well, okay, nobody really wants to see that. That's not really what people are after. So I kind of scrapped that, and I started looking at other projects I was working on. And then ttrpg announced their new phone PDF format. And I always like experimenting with different ideas. So I thought, well, Tricube Tales is pretty small. I reckon that could fit onto a phone PDF quite well. So I reformatted it, and I took on board the previous suggestion about adding examples, and added a bunch of examples to it, and I re-released it as a phone PDF. And it got a bit more attention. It didn't get not as much as I'd hoped, but I did get a few people picking it up and a little bit of feedback from that. And I was sort of on the fence about whether it was worth carrying on, or if I should, start looking at something else. And then in 2020, so last year, there was the one-page RPG jam. And I'd always fancied joining one of these jams on itch. So I thought, yeah, I'll just do it. Why not? So I decided to have a go at using the Tricube Tales system, but actually turning it into a one-page RPG. Just because the previous version I'd released, which was this one sheet system, it was just all text, and it was just too much. But I thought, if I can really distill it down so that I've got a system and a setting all on 1 sheet of paper, then that could actually work quite well. So that's what I did.
What was the first one-page game that you made?
It was the Fools Who Follow. And that was inspired by some Reddit discussion I saw, where people were talking about, the chosen one. What would happen, if the chosen one died? Was what the original discussion was about. What would his companions do then? They carry on without him. And I thought, well, what if take that one step further? What if the chosen one is a complete idiot, and you have to drag him along, kicking and screaming, to fulfill his destiny? Because playing the chosen one in a role-playing game is not something you really want people to do, because they overshadow everyone else, unless it's their solo game. But if you've got the chosen one as an NPC and players are his companions, then I think that works quite well.
And did you do the graphic design and layout and everything for it?
I didn't create the artwork. The artwork is from Rick Hershey of Fat Goblin Games, and the background is from Figu Design. I think it was originally Lord Sezi Works, and then she worked for them, and then she formed her own company. So the credits may have changed a bit between versions, but yeah, I did all of the layout for it. I wanted to experiment because I thought I've seen a lot of these one-page RPGs that use really nice graphics and really nice color schemes and lasers and feelings, for example. I looked at that and I thought, wow, it looks really pretty. And I thought, I'd like to try and do something that really looks nice and has different colors. So I tried to go with a three color scheme. So purple, green, and orange, but there's only a little bit of orange on the front page.
And so the first page is kind of the rules, and then the second page is more like the adventure. What I really found interesting was you're adding a twist to the story of rolling a dice and like your own random table, and having a symbol as the twist that you were to basically be inspired by whatever the symbol might be. How did you come up with that?
Well, the original idea came from Rory's story cubes, which are really excellent, and that's also something I've played with my son just for improvised stories. And when I was working on Saga of the Goblin Horde, I wanted to create a custom action deck for it, and because of the license, I couldn't sell anything that was for Savage Worlds, so I couldn't include any rules on the deck itself. But I thought, well, what I could do is I could still put some functionality on the deck. So I went with the 4 jokers, and I added these symbols on the bottom, which were kind of inspired by Rory's story cubes. Well, when I was working, not on that first one-page RPG, it was actually on, I think it was on one of the second or the third one, when I was looking at it was one of the space ones, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could have a tie-in with my Galactic Countdown deck? I could have like this one-page RPG, and you can use this deck with it. And I thought, well, it's a bit cheeky to expect people to use this expensive deck with a one-page RPG. So I thought, well, okay, what else could I do? What else could I do with these symbols? So I thought, well, how about if I put a really small table at the bottom of the back of the second page? So the Fools Who Follow, the one that you looked at there, when I first released it, it was just one sheet of paper. And then I think the second one I created was Goblin Gangsters. And then when I was working on that, I thought, well, maybe I could do something on the second page, because I had a bit more experience with one-page RPGs then. And I'd come to realize that although the general rule seems to be, from speaking to other game designers, that a one-page RPG should be fully playable with the first page, but you can put stuff on the second page as long as it's not required to play it. So the way I did this here, as you can see, it's got the character creation, it's got the rules, it's got the adventure generator, and then the second page is just examples for the adventure generator. But I tried to actually use these examples to flesh out the world as well. So although they really serve as examples for the adventure generator, they also kind of give you some more insight into the world itself and some of the people that you might meet there. And the original version of this Goblin Gangsters, it didn't have the twist table at the bottom. And it was only on the third one I created, which I think would have been Interstellar Bounty Hunters. And that was the one which I wanted to have the tie-in with the Galactic Dust Laser Knights. That's the one. So it was only with this one, when I thought I could have the tie-in with the Galactic Countdown deck, I thought, well, I'll try this twist table. And I liked it. I really liked it. And it was really well received. Everybody that saw it thought it was great. So I went back and updated Goblin Gangsters to add this twist table to that as well. And then later on, I went back to the Fools to Follow, and I updated that so that also had the same style. Because I thought, I wanted them all to have the same kind of style. Because if you've got a concept that works, I think it's worth sticking to it to some extent. I like experimenting with different things, and I like trying out different things. But if you've got something that people like, I think there's also a lot of value in sticking with that and giving them more of it. So this one, Interstellar Bounty Hunters, was when I was watching The Mandalorian with my son. And I thought, yep, I'll see if I can run a Mandalorian game with him.
One of the things that, like, it's so obvious when you look at your collection of games that you've put out is how it's so genre driven that you can like apply your game set or game mechanics to a different genre so quickly, and it's just like effortless, really. And you design the game that really adapts to those. And did you know that going into it, or was it kind of more like a happy accident where you went, this really just works?
No, it was intentional, but the problem was trying to explain that to people. Because if people see a generic system and there's no setting, then the response always seems to be that, you know, a lot of people don't want to do the hard work of creating their own setting for it, which is fair enough, you know. But people look at this and it's just, well, it's just another generic system. There's loads of generic systems out there. And I think there's a lot of value in having a generic system that you can apply to a lot of settings. I think that's one of the big strengths of something like Savage Worlds, for example. You know, Savage Worlds is a very flexible system. But I don't think it would be anywhere near as successful as it is if there wasn't such a huge library of settings for it. But I'm just one person. I can't create loads and loads of settings for the system myself. So, you know, I needed some sort of compromise, and creating these one-page RPGs, I can do one of those fairly quickly. I can do it in a few days. And, you know, that's something that I can manage myself. And each time I release one of these, you know, people pay attention and they go back and they pick up the older ones as well. And, you know, really, I think one of my initial ideas going forward was that I just really wanted to show people what you could do with the main system itself. And my hope was that people would, you know, start reading some of these and they would reach a point where they say, well, you know, I could just do my own. I don't need to look at all of these. I don't need to download all of these. Look, you know, I've looked at like half a dozen and I can see that, you know, there's a formula here. You just have your concept and your perks and your quirks. I can do that for my setting. I don't need to use yours anymore. And that's what I want. I want people to look at these and treat them as examples of how they can easily adapt their own settings to Tricube Tales.
And you released it as Creative Commons 3.
Not all of them. The main book itself, Tricube Tales, the full text. I can't release the artwork because it's I don't have the licensing rights for that. But the full text of it is under the Creative Commons 3, and there's I think two of the one pages are also under the Creative Commons, and the others aren't. But you can download them all for free. You can download all of the PDFs for free.
And so just tell me, in a perfect world, what would happen? Like if I were going, you know what, I really like Tricube, I'm gonna make a game out of it. What would be the steps? Do I have to contact you, or is it just?
You just have to put on there somewhere in the credits that it's based on Tricube Tales by Richard Woolcock. And I'd say it's nice if you want to also make that like a link back to my game. That's cool, but you don't have to do that. If you on the Tricube Tales itself, there's also a Word document version of it, and that has like the clarification of the licensing as well. But you can also just copy the text from it. You know, I've seen a few people one person has created, I think, a Korean translation. Another person has created a French translation of it. And, you know, it's my hope that more people will start using that. So I think that there are 5 publishers now who have created their own Tricube Tales products, which I think is pretty cool. Although 2 of them are not on Drive-Thru RPG, they're just on itch.
And so just to give us, I know we kind of jumped into the actual system, but we actually didn't explain some of the mechanics of it in a little bit more detail. Of like, you get 3 dice.
Yep. And
you've got 3 kind of main categories or traits. Correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'll let you take over rather than me try to bastardize your system. What's the sales pitch for people to use your system?
Well, it's just a very, very simple system. It's the idea was that your character is so simple, you don't really even need to write it down. That it's just a sentence that you can remember, and the mechanics are also very, very simple to understand. So it's not. I'm not trying to be unique or innovative here or anything. It's really just my attempt to create a nice, simple system that's got an open license that people can use. So, there's a lot of games out there that really try to go unique and try to offer something amazing that nobody's seen before. Okay, that's cool, but that's not what I was trying to do here. Yeah, I just wanted a very simple game that I could use spur of the moment. The rules are simple enough that I can remember them. The characters are simple enough that you don't really even need to write them down. So no real bookkeeping, very low prep. And I used tokens rather than writing things down. This was something that I found worked pretty well with my son when he was younger, actually having something he could physically hold. And yeah, the traits and so on in there is something that I added over time. So the early versions of the game, it was literally you would just have like 1, 2, or 3d6 depending on your concept. But when I was doing play testing, I found that in some settings, it became very difficult to differentiate between characters. I ran a game which was sort of like a X-Files style game, where the players were sort of government agents working for a secret agency. And of course, they all kind of had the same skills. So they ended up always rolling the same number of dice. So I added the trait in there, the agile, brawny, or crafty, just to really kind of help differentiate between the characters. And yeah, so the system has gone through a few iterations, but really it's just a very simple game. If you like games like, say, Fate or Rissus, so you'll see sort of the same sort of style of improvisation in there, and the fact that it can be adapted to a huge range of different genres and settings. So I call it a generic system. I mean, it's not the case that a system can be used for every setting, but it's not tied to any particular setting. If you've seen from the one pages, which is what I tried to demonstrate, is that you can really just use it for anything. It doesn't really require much effort.
And I think it's really spectacular as far as, like you said, it does not even need to be on a character sheet. It's something that could be easily remembered. And then the monsters are just as simple, or opponents are just as simple. And a lot of it's all player rolled, no GM intervention other than describing the setting. And I've heard actually some people refer to it as like, they get the same vibe as like Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate. And it's, in my estimation, almost even more simple. Like it's, but there's still some mechanics involved that are 2 levers, one on the player side and one on the difficulty side. And you're able to really have a robust adventure with just those 2 levers. Yeah.
I mean, there's some complexity with, say, the karma and the perks and quirks, but that really ties into my own personal preferences here, which is that I don't like to have things left completely up to the dice. I like the players to have some way to actively control the odds in some way. So with the karma, the players can kind of decide when they want to be more likely to succeed at a particular challenge, or when they're willing to reduce their chances in return for better chances later on. And this is also something that I picked up from Savage Worlds with the bennies. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea that it's not just this. I think this is also one of the issues I had with some of the older D&D style games that I've played, where you would roll your dice, you roll your D20, and that was it. There was no re-rolls, no fudging, and I like it to feel more like a game that you can directly control. So it's not just luck, and it's not just decision making, but it's a combination of the two. And I tried to incorporate that, even though I wanted the system to still be very simple. And yeah, the player facing was really because my son doesn't like it when I roll against him. He doesn't want to feel that I'm trying to play against him, to try and beat him. So this is why I started getting into the idea of player facing. But after I ran a few like that, I thought, I actually do like this, because even when I'm playing with a group of adults, it means I can just kind of throw a challenge at them and just let them get on with it. But I just tell them what to roll. I'm not rolling anything myself. If I'm running a Savage Worlds game and there's a lot of rolling, then even though I'm very fast with it because I know the rules very well, I still have to roll lots of dice for the characters. And and I know the tricks, like rolling a group of characters as a dice pool, and I can quickly filter through successes and raises and so on. but still I'm having to roll for all of the NPCs, and if I'm playing with 6 players, then it does slow down a bit. And being able to just say to them, look, you know, you roll to hit and then you roll to defend. I'm not doing any rolling. I'm just telling you what you have to roll. You deal with that. You deal with these guys, and I'll move on to the next player and tell them what they need to do. And people can just resolve their stuff in parallel. I don't need to do anything.
Well, it's a fascinating, simplistic system, and you're in Munich, Germany, correct?
Yep,
and I showed you that earlier of this odd ball set that I found here in Canada in German, and so I found that interesting. And how is your German, living there so long?
It's okay. I mean, I became a German citizen recently, so for political reasons related to the UK, I became a German citizen so that I can stay, because my wife is German and my son is a dual national. So yeah, I have to speak German to at least a certain degree for that. I think I took my first German test, which was required for the citizenship, which was just level B1, which isn't particularly high, but they gave me 100% on the spoken. So,
well, there you go.
But my spoken is definitely a lot better than my written. So,
and
I use spoken.
So what's the future hold for you? Now you've got the system. Are you going to end up having continue to develop more one-page games and more genres?
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of system where it's not really necessary to expand it. I wouldn't create a companion for it. And I might, for example, at some point say, okay, perhaps I can, you know, flesh it out with some more examples or better descriptions. And this is actually the 4th version of the phone PDF, where I have in the past clarified a few things, but I've never actually changed the rules. All I've done is added additional, you know, for example, I've put in a section on how you can deal with opposed challenges between players or between NPCs who wouldn't normally roll. And the genre sections at the back, where I give some advice on how to handle different genres. But the book itself is not really going to change. But I can definitely add more of these one pages, and I might also create some larger adventures as well. I don't know if you've encountered Lady Blackbird. It's a fantastic product. Absolutely love it. And I wouldn't try and imitate that, but I love the idea of having something over several pages with pre-generated characters that have all of their history kind of all tied in there. And it's got a wonderful, short but evocative pitch, and you know, maybe I'll have a go at creating something a bit larger along those sort of lines, rather than a one-pager. Maybe something that's a bit bigger that can be designed, you know, really for shorter play, but where, you know, you want to give the players a bit more information rather than creating their own characters, to actually have some pre-gens with their own stories and so on. So I've got some ideas like that. I think it's important to carry on releasing stuff for it, and I certainly plan to continue releasing more one pages for it, because I'm enjoying them, and I've still got loads of ideas that I'd like to explore. But also, I found that it's building up momentum at the moment. You know, if I stopped now, I think it would sort of loosen up a bit, and people would start to drift away. So while I've got people sort of showing an interest, I would like to kind of really keep that going and keep releasing new stuff for it. And, you know, as I said before, these one pages don't really take a huge amount of effort to write, but which is good, because I don't actually have so much free time these days. But there's other projects I'd like to work on as well. But for the Tricube Tales, I think I will certainly keep this going, because, you know, releasing this one-page RPG for it was definitely a good move. You know, I can see that the more I release, the more interest it drives to the earlier ones.
You need to host a jam.
I'm not sure if it's quite that popular.
Well, but I'll participate. How about that? You set it
up. I'm still focused primarily on drive-through RPG, because I have an exclusive deal through drive-through RPG, which means that although I have a few free products on itch, they are not things that I also have on drive-through, which means so if I put stuff on itch, I can't also put it on drive-through.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll think about changing that at some point, but still, well, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, this is a good suggestion. Doing a jam would certainly I mean, I've seen a couple of other systems, and they've used jams and really picked up a lot of interest from the community as a result. So,
and so as we've talked, like, you're not an overnight success, but I would consider you a success in the game design world. So that's, like, kudos to you. But what advice would you give to other designers that are starting out, other than don't do it? What would you advise them to do as far as, like, grow their careers in game design?
Well, I mean, I'm still a pretty small fish, and I think different approaches work for different people. But what's worked for me is, I guess, two things. Is first of all is to work on the things that I really enjoy, because if I'm not motivated to work on something, then I lose interest, and you can see it in the writing, and it takes me ages to finish as well. But if I'm excited about something, then I really pour myself into it, and I get much better results. And in particular with these one-page RPGs, because they're very short, I can really strike while the iron's hot. I really churn them out while I'm still really excited about the project. I don't have to worry about boredom setting in or losing interest or running out of momentum. I can just go through the whole project and it's finished, and I can see for myself that I've actually achieved something, which is also really good for my motivation. So yeah, the first advice then is to really focus on something that you really are passionate about. And the second thing, which works for me, is to not just release it and move on, but to release it and then keep releasing more stuff for it. So with Saga of the Goblin Horde, I started off with a one-sheet adventure for it, and then I added the archetypes, and then more adventures and more archetypes, and then the setting and the cards and the map, and I just kept releasing more and more stuff for it, and it really gathered a lot of interest from people, and it gathered a lot of attention, and people really wanted to talk about it and play it. And then again with Tricube Tales, when I first released it, there wasn't much interest at all. But as I released more and more one pages for it, people have started getting more and more interested. So this would be my second advice, which would be to keep supporting your product line. Don't release it and move on, but release it and keep releasing and releasing and releasing it, and keep showing people, look, here it is, here's the system again, here it is again, here it is. So that people keep seeing this name of the system, and they keep seeing these one pages, and they start to notice, and if they notice one and download it, then you've got their attention. And then maybe they'll talk about it to somebody else, and then somebody else might ignore it the first 2 or 3 times. But when they see another one, what's this? They'll have a look. So yeah, so focus on something you're passionate about, and keep on supporting that product line with more releases.
Great. And where can people find more information about Tricube or all your games? Where can they look for you?
Well, I'm on Drive-Thru, I'm on Itch. I've got a blog which I don't actually update very often. I have a Discord channel as well, and I can provide you links if you want to include them in the video.
I'll make sure that they end up in the description of the video and on the show notes. And we'll make sure that people can connect with you and download your games and check out Tricube. And maybe that's going to be something that people are going to be able to leverage and use for their own mechanics and build their own games.
I would hope so. Yeah, I know that there was one person that took the game and really modified it quite a bit, and I think that's absolutely cool. People should definitely make it their own. Don't just take it as it is, but really try and play with things and play with ideas. And I'm always happy to give feedback on that and explain why I did something the way I did. So yeah, I'd love to see more people take the system and do things with it.
That's great. And so, Richard, thanks for joining me here today, and appreciate all the work that you're doing out there in the industry and some good advice that you've offered today, and wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.